Good evening, YouTube. Today I'm doing my presentation on pseudoscience. In this seminar, I will demonstrate the difference between science and pseudoscience, go into the history of pseudoscience, and provide some examples of the prevalent types of pseudoscience that are present today in our society. So, to start us off, before we can answer the question of what is pseudoscience, we need to actually know what science is. Now, my definition of what science is coming directly from the book Philosophy of Science, a very short introduction, written by Samir, Okasha. I apologize if I mispronounced that name. So, Okasha calls testimony from the great philosopher of the 20th century, Karl Popper, to answer the question of what a science is. Popper himself proposed that a fundamental feature of science is that its theory should adhere to falsifiability. Falsifiability means that for any hypothesis to be credible, it should have some inherently disprovable conditions. And Popper illustrates a pseudoscientific theory by using Marxist theory of history. So Karl Marx basically claimed that in industrialized societies around the world, capitalism would eventually lead to communism. But when this didn't occur, he provided an ad hoc explanation for why the occurrence was perfectly consistent with his theory. He claimed that the progress to communism was going at a very slow rate instead of considering the possibility that this theory might be completely wrong. Therefore, this theory could be adjusted to be compatible with any sort of phenomenon or event. Essentially, they're explaining away any unfavorable outcomes. The same also went for Freud's theory of psychoanalysis. So, to explain the patient's behavior, no matter what it may be, he would use the terms repression, sublimation, and unconscious desires. And these terms were compatible with any clinical data he had. And since all of his correlations were positive without the ability to be proven false or true, his theory is not genuinely scientific. Another red flag for pseudoscience is that they use a lot of technical language to explain far-ranging and impressive-sounding theories which can be factually unsupported or even untestable. They explain away any possible negative evidence with profoundly complex arguments and claim that the theories are actually in fact supported by the evidence without any reason as to why. Now, compare that to Einstein's theory of gravitation, also known as general relativity. It made a very definite prediction that light rays deflected from the stars would be deflected by the sun's gravitational field. And some scientists went out and found out that starlight was deflected by the sun, almost exactly by the amount that Einstein had predicted. The experiment was reproduced and the same results had occurred. Had there been no starlight, Einstein's theory would have been proven false. Therefore, it is falsifiable. One thing about Popper is that he saw falsifiability as core to being a science or not. So there was no leeway when it came to falsifiability in Popper's mind. If your theory was falsifiable, it was scientific. If not, nope, it was pseudoscience. And that actually isn't always the case. That's not just the only factor that comes in when determining something as science or pseudoscience. Yeah, I can speak from personal experience because I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences, but I was also pursuing my minor in sociology. And oftentimes in sociology we use case studies to observe people in, a setting, but we don't actually test any specific hypotheses or theories. And according to Popper, we're not scientific because we don't have any falsifiability. Now, this simply isn't true. Sociology is a science, albeit a soft science, but it is a science. It's tested on the MCAT. Yes, it's more observational and descriptive than your traditional biology, physics, and chemistry, but that by no means makes it any less of a science. So this point is brought up in Okasha's book with the chapter on the demarcation problem, which goes back to our question of how to distinguish pseudoscience from science, but in this case in regards to Karl Popper's definition. And a huge criticism of Popper's definition was that those who would just explain away any data that appear not to correlate with their theories rather than accepting that the theories have been refuted is not an ineffective method. Rather, scientists like Newton, whose work has led to scientific discoveries, have done this. So Newton made predictions about how the planets orbit the sun, but he had inconsistency in the orbit of the planet Uranus. And from what I gather in this reading here, apparently Newton ignored this unfavorable inconsistency and continued on with this theory. But later on, two scientists, Adam and Leverrier, were able to calculate how the mass and position that an additional planet would have to in order to make this work. And years later, the planet Neptune was discovered exactly where they had predicted. So we can see here the issue is that Popper's definition is too simple, and it cannot always be right despite its initial merit. Obviously, finding a theory that would fit all data is extremely difficult, but that being said, if a theory consistently conflicts with more and more data, and there is no way to refute the error, then it's more likely to be rejected. And we have statistical tests to check data, and we can reject or accept hypotheses based on the p-value. Of course, the demarcation problem is not here to argue numerical merits of a theory. Rather, the basis of the problem is the possibility of a common feature that can only be shared by what is called a science and nothing else. To sum it up, the philosophers critical of Popper's method said that little progress would be made if scientists simply abandoned their theories at the sign of first trouble. So, with all these examples, how do we then define pseudoscience? Well, first we can look at the Greek roots. Pseudo translates to false, and the Latin root scientia means knowledge. The Northern Journal of Medicine I-387 states that pseudoscience is the opposite kind of innovation which pronounces what has been recognized as a branch of science composed merely of so-called facts connected together by misappropriations under the disguise of principles, meaning that these beliefs, hypotheses, or methods are presented scientific, but cannot be adequately tested and lack credible evidence and do not adhere to the scientific method. To put it in some perspective, we can look at the publication The Use of Pseudoscience in Science Education, written by Michael Martin, an associate professor, where he terms the properties of pseudoscience into two. He says the first is the surface property, which appears scientific, and then the second is its depth property, which reveals the unscientific nature of its claims. This is dangerous because humans tend to seek confirmation rather than refutation. And usually the biggest problem with pseudoscience is the lack of understanding with the cause and effect scenario, and then falsely applying that misinformation. So an example of that. In the summertime, statistics have shown that ice cream sales rise. Statistics have also shown that the amount of sunburn incidence also rises. Is there a correlation between ice cream and sunburn? So a pseudoscientist would perhaps say that there are chemicals in the ice cream which are somehow affecting your skin, and it is causing the UV radiation from the sun to hit your skin, and those chemicals in the ice cream are reacting with the UV radiation, giving you that crazy sunburn. So stop eating ice cream, and you'll see that sunburn will go down. When asked what chemicals cause this in the ice cream, the pseudoscientist may not respond at all, or he might give an answer like that there is just too many chemicals in the ice cream for us to know, but it's definitely the ice cream. Well, Mr. Pseudoscientist, I'm sorry to say, but this theory is unfounded. The reason for both increases is due to the increase in temperature. There is no study, data, or anything supporting the fact that ice cream directly increases your chances of getting sunburn. In fact, the first recorded usage of the term pseudoscience was used to describe alchemy, the proposed method of converting alkali metals, alkaline earth metals, and pretty much anything into gold. And also converting that gold into the elixir of immortality has never been proven to work. So I'm ending my presentation here. I've cited all the readings I read to make this video in the description below. Also, the images I used in this video are all licensed under Creative Commons attributions, so I'm just citing their licenses too. So thank you everyone for watching my video, and I hope it was informative. Have a nice day.